right, everybody, welcome to day 11 of distance learning. Today we're going to talk about natural selection. So I know you talked about evolution before you headed off to break, but we're going to talk about how this process takes place. So a few things to keep in mind. You should know that in general, evolution takes a very, very, very long time, right? It's a really long process, and it actually suggests that ancestors in the past were once related. So there's a common ancestor between all living organisms that at one point existed. And there's a few pieces of evidence that I want to remind you about evolution that we know scientifically evolution did take place. One is a homologous structure or comparative anatomy. And that's the idea that the bone organization in our hand versus the bone organization in a whale fin or in a bat wing or in a cat or dog leg is the same. So these bones, they're not maybe the same size, and obviously they don't have the same function because I can't fly like a bat or I can't swim as efficiently as a whale can. But these bones occur in the same order anatomically speaking, meaning the structure of it is the same. Vestigial structures is another one. Those are structures that we have currently, but they don't really have a function that is critical for life. An example of that would be the human appendix. So we know that it's there. It doesn't have a set function today. Scientists currently believe that it did have something having to do with digestion in early humans when they were eating more of a like grassy, planty diet. So it doesn't have a function in its current form, but at one point we used it. Fossil evidence also suggests that there has been change over time due to how skeletals of the same organism look, and then looking at DNA gene sequences, right? That sequence of ATCG, those nucleotides, are common even in different species. All right, so after today's lesson, you should be able to define natural selection. You should be able to identify 4 factors that contribute to natural selection and justify how evolution takes place with natural selection. And we'll talk about all those. And we'll talk a little bit about Darwin as well. So the 4 factors that will influence evolution are population size, variation of traits or alleles, competition for resources, and the rate of reproduction. And I'm going to kind of go through each one when I talk about that. Again, keep in mind what we talked about with mutations and meiosis. That will come into play, and I'll talk about that a little bit briefly at the end too, just as a refresher if you need it. So when we talk about natural selection, we have to have these 4 things happen for this to occur. So overpopulation, we need to be able to have a good amount of organisms, a good number of organisms in that population, so we know that they can reproduce with each other. This causes the genes and the genetic material to shuffle, right? Because ideally they're having offspring with different partners, and that will change the type of DNA that we get. Genetic variation means we're going to have a lot of different traits, okay? You know, if we have a bunch of different traits, it means that if the environment changes, so if I'm a white furred bunny and all of a sudden my environment changes to favor the dark trait, any dark furred bunnies are more likely to survive because they're harder to see, and they're more likely to reproduce, right? Because they're going to be higher in numbers because they're not getting killed by predators as often. Again, that goes to my third one of competition. So in the example that I said of, let's say, bunny rabbits, if you're a white bunny rabbit in a white environment, you're going to have an advantage because you're going to be able to blend in. Predators aren't going to have an easy time to see you. It's going to be difficult. If you're a brown colored bunny rabbit in a white colored environment, you're going to stick out really quickly, right? And vice versa. So again, the traits that are good really depend on how the environment looks. And then successful reproduction, okay? So over generations, again, over time, this isn't something that happens quickly, we should see an increase in a favored trait. So if I'm a brown furred bunny in a brown environment, I should see that over time, that brown fur trait is going to appear more frequently in the offspring that are happening in that population, okay? This image on the side over here, you kind of see that. So you're seeing these birds, they're eating these bugs. Now, if you're wondering, hey, why are they eating the green bugs? It's not because the green bugs taste better. It's because the green bugs are easier to see, right? The orange one in this example kind of blend in a little bit better. And so that's why over time, you would see the orange ones becoming a larger population because they're able to reproduce more successfully. All right, so let's talk about Darwin and his finches in the Galapagos. So hopefully you know Darwin was this really cool guy. Traveled in the HMS Beagle, went to a bunch of different islands. Specifically, he went to the Galapagos Islands. And really, he just went on this journey to really just be a dinner partner for this person that was setting off to do other things. But he was a collector, and he collected birds while he was there, right? And kind of looked at them. Now, I know that sounds kind of morbid because these birds were dead. But what he was looking at specifically were the sizes of their beaks. So you can look at all these finches over here, and you can see that their beaks are different sizes. And he wasn't sure why. Like, why would the same bird have 4 different types of beaks? And we'll talk about that. So he thought they were different types of birds. Actually, they were all the same bird, okay? They came from the mainland, right? So they came primarily from Ecuador. And he was like, well, why are they different? If it was the same bird and now they all look different, what caused that to take place? And I hope that this gives you a little clue about what you're kind of gonna figure out about what took place. Is basically it was related to their food and their diet. So if we found, let's say, a finch in a certain island, maybe there were only, I don't know, insects there. So these finches were likely to have smaller beaks so that they could pinch those insects and get their food, right? Over here on this island, there were seed eaters. And so they had larger beaks because they needed these strong, powerful beaks to actually crack these seeds so that they could get their food. So what he found ultimately was, even though they all had this common ancestor, they were related in that fact. The environment basically selected for which trait was favorable. Natural selection, right? Nature selected for what trait was favorable. If I'm in an environment where there's only seeds, if I'm in an environment where there's only seeds, then guess what? This is good, because I need this size beak to eat my seeds. If I'm in an environment where there's only cactus flowers, I need this type of beak because that's going to help me, right? And so again, it's all about this idea of structure and function. The structure of the finch beak has to match its function, or in this case, its diet, okay? All right, so what he concluded, he said, all right, there has to be these variations, these differences in beaks. It's an adaptation to foods that are available to them. So again, it means that these animals were likely to survive more if they had a bigger beak, right? So they could pass down that trait. Natural selection for most fit. So again, survival of the fittest, whatever organism had the fittest or the best fit trait for that environment. And then they inherit successful traits. So if I have a big beak and I'm using that big beak to eat more frequently than other finches that don't have a big beak, I'm more likely to live longer and I'm more likely to reproduce. And by reproducing, I'm passing on that trait to the next generation, okay? Sometimes this causes them to separate into different species, and that's fine. So this just goes and kind of gives you this little idea of beak size and what we know that the beaks did, and I just kind of gave you that image to think about it. I really want to make sure that we're clear on this. This does not mean that traits are inherited or acquired for a lifetime. So for example, Lamarck said that, like, okay, giraffes that stretched their neck over time got these leaves, and then that's what happened. That's not how it works, okay? I'll give you a human example. That would be like saying if I had a huge nose, I get a nose job to make it smaller or whatever. If I have a kid, is my kid gonna have the genetic material for a small nose? No, they're not. My kid is gonna have the genetic material for whatever my DNA programmed, which in this case would have been a big nose. So again, evolution is not by an acquired trait. It's not that they acquire it in their lifetime. It's something that gets inherited from parent to offspring, passed down from parent to offspring. All right, a quick reminder just about mutations real fast because I don't want to take up too much time. So what are mutations? You know that they're changes in the DNA sequence. You should know those A, T, C's, and G's somehow trade and shift. I'm not going to get into all types of mutations. You can go back and watch that video if you'd like. If it occurs in a somatic cell or a body cell, that doesn't get passed down to the offspring, okay? If it occurs in a gamete like sperm or egg, that's going to get passed down to offspring, because remember, the sperm and the egg are really what's fertilizing, making that zygote, and then creating that organism. Okay, so are they helpful? Are they harmful? Again, this is just a quick recap. While they happen regularly, most of them are neutral. Most of them just are silent mutations. They don't really affect what protein is getting made at the end of DNA synthesis. But keep in mind, whether they're helpful or harmful depends on their environment. Okay, chemicals and UV radiation cause mutations as well. And so this was just giving you an idea of how these mutations could look. So if we had an original one, we had a deletion now, we have an inversion, just swapping them. So it kind of plays that for you. So original sequence, we substitute the G for a C, we insert, we just add a random letter G, we delete a letter that should be there, and inversion is switching. Okay, I'm hoping that this was helpful for you. Have a great rest of the day. You're doing awesome. As always, please, please, please reach out if you need any help.